For joining us today in this summer of Indian elections to today's session on Election Eve, Indians reflect on the state of the nation and the world. It's a new Pew Research Survey report, which you'll find very interesting. We are honored to have with us Mr. Bruce Stokes, Director, Global Economic Attitudes at the Pew Research Center, US, and Ms. Indrani Bagchi, Diplomatic Editor of India's largest English daily, The Times of India. Before I hand over the stage to Ms. Bagchi, who would be steering the discussions, may I please request you to turn your phones on silent or switch it off, and please do join us for tea and coffee after the session. Ms. Bagchi.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I will not waste too much time on lengthy introductions because I don't think anybody needs to be introduced to Bruce Stokes, who has frankly kept us entertained and educated about how the world is thinking about almost everything. And in my view, he's the director of an organization that really maps the world's mind. And but today it is our turn. Stokes' previous survey, which we all wrote about last month, was an Indian political report on what is it that Indians really want out of these elections. But today we will reflect, I think, on the latest survey, which talks about how Indians look at themselves. And from where I sit, we are a completely self-obsessed nation. But I think today we are even more self-obsessed, and we are deeply dissatisfied, as I think you would probably realize if you just did a straw poll anywhere in this country. But I will leave the details to Bruce to flesh out, and do keep questions handy, short, pithy, so we can allow everybody to have a chance. Bruce?
Great. Indrani, thank you so much, and thank you all for coming, and I want to thank the Ananta Center for inviting us, Kiran Pashrika in particular, an old friend, for working with Pew to set up this meeting. As Indrani said, these are the results of a survey we have done in India, but it's part of a broader effort by the Pew Research Center to better understand public attitudes around the world. Just to give you a brief sense of that, because people always ask, who are we? We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank based in Washington. We do public opinion research for the most part, have done it in about 82 countries. We're funded by the Pew Charitable Trust, which is one of these wonderful American creations, these foundations that were funded by former robber barons from the 19th century. I mean, people who made a lot of money back in the good old days, but left it to do good works. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Fords, and Mr. Pew, who was the founder of Standard Oil Company. And we do this research for free. In other words, it's available to anyone. So if you find anything in this presentation of interest, it's all available on the website. It's all searchable. It's all free. There's more information there, I think, than you could ever need or want on a range of countries, including India. In fact, these are the countries we've surveyed just in the last 12 months. Just so you know, we'll be doing another 45-country survey this late spring and summer, including again in India, looking at the emerging middle classes in emerging markets and what people are, what are the attitudes and values of people as they become more middle class. And hopefully we'll have some interesting results. This survey was done in December and January in India in 8 different languages. It covers about 91% of the Indian population with a margin of error of plus or minus 3.8 percentage points. So it's a standard survey that we do all over the world. As Indrani said, the mood in India, and this will come as no surprise to the Indians in the room, is quite sour. Basically 70% of the Indian population are dissatisfied with the direction of the country. We know in the United States that direction of the country questions are one of the most telling pre-election indicators of what's likely to happen. Clearly, people do not like the direction of the country. When you ask Indians, as we did, about the major problems facing the society domestically, as you can see, basically they're upset about everything. When you have more than 8 in 10 people tell you that everything is a very bad problem, they're just in a sour mood. There's no differentiation here. People are worried about prices, they're worried about jobs, they're worried about corruption, they're worried about inequality, and 65% say political and parliamentary deadlock is a major problem for the country, which is certainly an indictment of what's going on these days inside politics in India. We did ask people about institutions in the society. We do this all over the world. What was interesting, I found, was that only the military got strong institutional support. 75% of the public said they have a lot of confidence in the military. Notice that only 38% had confidence in the national government of the Lok Sabha, really not much better in terms of the state governments. So people are generally not very happy with the institutions and the functioning. This feeds back into we're worried about the gridlock and so forth in the country. What is interesting, however, and somewhat counterintuitive, is that people still are fairly pleased with the economy. I found this surprising. We all know that India is growing at half the rate it was a couple of years ago. I would have expected people to be more upset about the economy than they are. As George Gallup used to say years ago, the one tenet for pollsters has to be, don't try to overinterpret what people tell you. You ask them a question, they gave you an answer. We asked them a question what they thought about the economy. 57% said they thought the economy was good. I can't explain that. I'm sure a number of you are shaking your heads. You can't explain it. But it is what people told us. They are fairly optimistic about the economy over the next 12 months. Now, it does appear, I mean, this seems to more reflect what many analysts say, that the economy may have bottomed out. It may be coming back a bit. It does also put, it seems to me, a great deal of pressure on the next government. That 62% think the economy is going to get better over the next year. If I'm the next government in India, it seems to me I want to be sure that that happens, or people may start to blame me for not enabling the economy to live up to its expectations. And 64% of the public think their children will be better off. Now that, it seems to me, is totally to be expected. Basically, most Indians are doing better than their parents. There's a high expectation they'll be doing, their kids will do better than they do, based on their own life experience. I will tell you, though, that that's relatively low for some emerging markets. In other words, in China, it's more like 90%. In Brazil, it's higher. While 2 out of 3 say their kids are going to be better off, Indians are not as optimistic about their kids' future as maybe some other people in emerging markets. I can tell you that they're much more optimistic for their kids than people in Europe or the United States, where it's very telling that in the wake of the Great Recession, both Europeans and Americans do not think their kids are going to be better off than they are, and that's not typical in the West. There is this real split between emerging market views of the future for their kids and the next generation and advanced economies view. I fully realize that this election in India is not being run on foreign policy issues. This election will be determined on domestic issues. But the reality is India is an emerging power. It will soon become the world's largest country. It will be certainly among the top half dozen or even closer to the top 4 or 5 economies in the world by 2050. it is a major player in its own region and aspires to be a major player in the world. So Indian attitudes towards the rest of the world, while not a political issue in this campaign, it seems to us at least, are important to track and to follow, because the next government is going to have to at least recognize that its public has views on global issues, even though they may not be the predominant views in terms of how it votes. We ask Indians what we've asked in a number of other countries: do you think that your country is as respected as it should be around the world? 63% of Indians say we should be more respected. This is slightly higher, actually, than the Chinese say. I must admit, we haven't asked this in every country. My guess is most countries don't think they're as respected as they should be. That's maybe kind of normal. But at least this is what the Indians tell us. We ask people about their global concerns. In other words, what are you worried about in terms of developments around the world? And if I can get this pointer to work. As you can see, Islamic extremism is a great worry for 2/3 of the population. We'll see that crop up in other areas as well. Political instability in Pakistan, a big concern. A couple of other things here I think to note. One is that 53% of Indians say that global climate change is a major threat to the country. I can tell you we asked that question in China and the United States, and only 40% and 39% of the publics in those two countries say it's a major threat. So Indians are much more aware of this problem than are the populations of the two countries who are most to blame for this problem. Now, that's not to excuse the fact that India's contribution to carbon is actually growing as well, but Indians seem to be much more aware of the danger than do the Chinese or Americans. I think it's also notable that 56% of the public say China's power and influence is a major threat. Only 27% say that about the United States. So in terms of relative concern, Indians seem to be much more worried about China than they are about the United States. We asked people specifically, we wanted them to compare some specific threats. We asked them about the greatest threat to the country. Is it Pakistan? 47% said Pakistan. Are the Naxalites? Only 19% said that. Lashkar-e-Taiba, 20%. China, only 6%. So even though people are worried about China, if you force them to compare it to other concerns, they're really not that worried at all. What they're really worried about is Pakistan. We ask people, as we have all over the world for more than a dozen years, just to give us a favorable, unfavorable view of various other countries or institutions. What's notable is that over half the Indian public has a favorable view of the United States. Bear in mind, we were in the field during this trouble between India and the United States over the Deputy Consul General in her treatment in New York, which would suggest that this has not had a major impact on the general public's view of the United States. People are fairly positively disposed towards Japan. As you know, there's a budding economic and strategic relationship between Japan and India. Basically, more Indians have an unfavorable view of China than they have a favorable view. And down at the bottom of the list is Pakistan. Indians are very negative about Pakistan. On the Pakistan issue, people do want there to be an effort to resolve the Kashmir dispute. We didn't ask people how they wanted the Kashmir dispute resolved. One might expect that they would want an Indian resolution of this rather than a pro-Pakistani resolution of that. But they are very worried about Pakistan and want to see it resolved. People seem to be not that terribly enthusiastic about improving relations with Pakistan. Yes, it's true that 35% say it's a very important, 29% say it's somewhat important. You add those two together, you certainly get over half the population would like to see an improvement. But the intensity of people's feeling about improving relations with Pakistan, I think, is not overwhelming. And we did ask people about, though, would they like to see talks with Pakistan? And we've asked this question in India a number of times, and basically the public is supportive with talking with Pakistan. We also asked a question about, would you like to improve trade relations with Pakistan? People, again, said, yes, we'd like to see an improvement in trade relations. So I would say the sum total of all our questions about Pakistan is that basically people don't really like Pakistan. They would like to see the relationship get better. But the intensity of their interest in actually doing much about it is, depending on the question, somewhat questionable. I don't see it as a very high priority. We ask about attitudes towards the United States in part because we have been asking about attitudes towards the United States around the world for the last dozen years or so. It's one of the trend measures that we have in our surveys all over the world. Basically, Indians like Americans. They like the United States. They would much rather improve ties with the United States than improve ties with China. And so I do think that's one of the interesting questions about the next government. Where does the next government put its efforts, improving ties with the US or improving ties with China? The public seems to be very clear. They would, by 4-1, they'd like to improve ties with the United States. And basically, people are more likely to see the US as a partner than as an enemy. Although, frankly, when you ask this enemy a question around the world, most people don't see anybody as an enemy. That's a pretty strong statement. It is true that some Indians see China as an enemy, though. When you look at the favorability of the US and how it stacks up versus the favorability of China, what I find interesting in this is it's across the board. I mean, whether it's men or women or young people or old people or less educated people or more educated people, high-income people, low-income people, everybody has a more favorable view of the US than they do of China. Yes, you do see what you might expect, more highly educated people, maybe they've spent time in the US or whatever, their kids are studying in the US. They're more likely to have a favorable view of the US than of China. Basically, high-income people are more favorably disposed than low-income people, but across the board, people seem to have a favorable view of the US, particularly in the south of India. That's what's also was striking in this data, was how popular the US was in the south of India. There's less confidence in Obama. I would point out to you that general confidence in Obama in India is about 10 points higher than it is in the United States. But it's all relative. Basically, confidence in Obama is less than it is in Great Britain or Germany, but it's higher than it is in China or Pakistan. Similarly, favorability of the US is in India is about roughly comparable to what it is in Germany, but less than it is in China or Pakistan. So India is someplace in the middle on both of these measures. In terms of approval of Obama's international policies, there's even less approval than overall approval for him, but again, that's what we see in the United States as well. Indians are opposed to the drone campaigns, one of these signature initiatives of the Obama administration, but I can tell you that the drone campaigns are unpopular all over the world, so it's not just in India. If you look at Indian attitudes towards China, basically more people are unfavorably disposed towards China than favorably disposed. As I said, you're more likely to find Indians who say that they see China as an enemy than as a partner, although I would point out to you that many Indians have no opinion about this issue. This is where when you get out into rural areas and you ask people, you end up having a lot of high no opinions on some of these foreign policy issues. 2/3 of Indians think China's military power is a bad thing for India. And 70% say that territorial disputes with China are a big or a very big problem for India. This is one of those things where most Indians have an opinion, and it's a very negative opinion. If you stack it up, US versus China, on a whole range of issues, as you can see, the US is more favorably seen, is more likely to be seen as taking in India's interests into account. This is very interesting. 47% of Indians see the United States as the world's leading economic power. Now, in fact, that is factually correct. We are the biggest economy. We have the highest per capita income. I can tell you in most parts of Europe, people say that China is already the world's leading economic power. Now, we can argue that the Europeans don't know what they're talking about, but perception is a bit reality here. If you think China's the biggest power, you're going to treat it like it's the biggest power. Indians still recognize that. In a lot of the world, people don't, and that's, frankly, from an American point of view, troubling, because it causes us problems. We also ask a question in India we've asked in other places, which is, who do you think is going to be the world's superpower in the future? And there, the Indians are more likely to say China. But again, they're less likely to say that than are most people in the world, including Americans, by the way. So Indians have a little more faith in our future, I think, than some Americans do. Meanwhile, basically, in terms of who's the biggest threat to India, overwhelmingly by 2-to-1, people say it's China. This is just a recap, by the way, the results we released somewhat earlier, just to give you a sense of what does this all mean potentially for the election. Basically, 63% of people in our survey said they would like to see the BJP lead the next government. That's 3-to-1. We did not ask who you're going to vote for, and we did not ask are you going to vote, and we did not go drill down, as I know Indian surveys do, into Tamil Nadu and how many seats are going to be won in various. We just wanted to get a sense of if you have a preference as to who would run the next government. And what we found is by 3-to-1, people say they would like a change, in essence. And you can see that's across the board on every demographic category, including, I think, and what's most interesting to me, is that in rural areas, the BJP is so popular. Among low-income people, the BJP is so popular. These are natural and historic Congress constituencies which seem to be willing to entertain the idea, at least, of change. Now, we don't know who these people are going to vote for once they go to vote. It's entirely possible they'll still vote for a local candidate, a regional party which may or may not align itself with the BJP or Congress. All we know is that when people were asked, who would you prefer to run the next government, they overwhelmingly said the BJP. Why is that? Well, in part it's because basically people see the BJP as better equipped to deal with all these problems we ask people about. We ask them about dealing with poverty. 54% said the BJP. Well, that's the Congress's argument for voting for Congress for years. Basically, people think that the BJP would be able to deal with these problems better than Congress. Young Indians in particular, as you know, many of these are going to be voting for the first time. They overwhelmingly chose the BJP over Congress on a whole range of issues. The red is, do you think Congress would do a better job? The blue is, do you think the BJP would do a better job? And Modi is more popular than Rahul Gandhi. This is just a straight-up favorability, thumbs up, thumbs down question. Now, notice, though, that the difference here is not as great as 3-to-1. So basically, people are more willing to say they would like the BJP to run the country. They're more willing to say the BJP would do a better job of handling the problems. while Modi is very favorably seen, I wouldn't want to underestimate that. Any politician who has a 78% favorability is not doing badly at all. But it's not as if he's running away with it in terms of the head-to-head competition with Gandhi the way the party does in its head-to-head against Congress. So all of this material is available online. As I say, it's searchable, it's free. I encourage you, if you ever have interests in not just India, but a range of other countries and what's going on and what might be the values and attitudes of people in those countries, go to our website, look at something you're interested in, the role of women in society, the people's attitudes on the environment. We're likely to have questions about that. And I will tell you, we will be having a number of surveys coming out in the future, including one we'll be releasing in a few weeks where we ask a series of questions about rape in India. These are questions in India about the issue of rape, which I think would be very interesting to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That was extremely, extremely interesting. I will now throw it open for questions, comments. Do keep them short, but keep them coming. What's your sample
About
size?
2,500 with a plus and minus of 3.8%. I might point out to you, I think to the layman, 2,500 seems like a very small number for a population of 1.2 billion or 1.1 billion. The reality is there are surveys that are done in India that have 25,000 people in them, and their margin of error is 3%. So while it's counterintuitive, it's really how you design the survey that determines and you design the survey based on what you want to get out of the survey. Now, those bigger surveys are trying to figure out how many seats BJP is going to win in Tamil Nadu. You need more people in Tamil Nadu to do that. We don't need that because that wasn't our goal. So you're able to, in the United States, we'll do a survey of 1,200 people or 1,500 people to get it at 300 million. So it's really the scientific design of the survey, even though I will admit to you that sounds counterintuitive to someone who's not involved in survey research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Did you or will you look at how people get their opinions? Is there any way that you can track whether people are being influenced by what they're watching on TV, or are they being affected by what their cousins in the cities are saying?
I don't think they can hear you.
So how do I turn it on?
It's a great question. So, yeah.
Well, I'll just have to shout.
Yeah.
Do we know
how people get their opinions? We are doing some work on how people use technology. And as part of that, then you do get news from the web, or do you get news from radio or TV? What we don't have is specific questions about how you get news about this particular election. That would be a great research topic. I do know that there's a professor at the University of Maryland who is doing some research campaign. And I'm very much looking forward to the results of that, because it does seem to me one can overemphasize the importance of this new media, and certainly the advocates of it, I think, do, because, for example, in Egypt, this was the Twitter revolution years ago. We actually did work on this, and we asked questions about people, how they got the information about the demonstrations and so forth. The percentage of people who actually were on Twitter or Facebook talking about the revolution was very, very slim. But, I think this is an emerging area of research we need to do more on.
Ma'am.
Very interesting in terms of opinions on the U.S., etc. Is this working?
Yeah.
Is this working?
Light is on.
Yeah, I think it's working, yeah.
But I'd like to turn to
You
the
could hold it a little
questions
closer.
on the upcoming election. On this part, I found the Pew polling actually deeply, deeply troubling. It was not only the way questions were asked. For example, QIND5 was asked after at least a dozen questions where the question was, what is currently wrong with the country, and would the Congress or the BJP be able to better deal with these issues? And then after all these questions on what was wrong, you asked the question of, in the next elections, is it going to be the BJP or Congress, or another party, or none of the above. So my question to you is, sequencing matters greatly for how people are asked, and I find the sequencing quite troubling. The way questions are formulated are quite troubling because, where is, the polling was done in December, I believe. Where is Arvind Kejriwal in all of this? Where, you showed some information about Rahul Gandhi versus Modi. Well, Rahul Gandhi is not the candidate. Congress party has not declared him as the candidate. So they're deeply troubling. Where are the regional parties in this? It's a misleading poll.
Yeah, there's like four questions there. First off, question order is very important. You're absolutely right. We pride ourselves on our question order. We think we ask the questions in the right order. You obviously disagree, but we have a lot of experience in this, and we spend a lot of time on that, and so we think we're right. But smart people can disagree. In terms of the timing of the survey, AAP was not a major issue when we were writing the questionnaire. I mean, as you can well imagine, you write this question, you have to translate it into 8 different Indian languages. There's a lead time. They had not won the Delhi election when we were writing the questionnaire. If we had asked about the AAP in Tamil Nadu before they'd even, won the election in New Delhi, it would have been a waste of a question, basically, because they wouldn't have heard of it. Do I wish we'd had asked about? Yeah, absolutely. But I understand the limitations here. Again, it's a valid criticism, but you got to do what you can when you can. Do I wish we had that data now? Absolutely. In terms of the popularity of various people, I showed you the Rahul Gandhi Modi, but we actually, if you look in the report, we asked about 6 or 8 different people. Rahul Gandhi was just one of them. We got criticism when we released the report. Why'd you ask about this person? He's no longer important. Well, we made a bet in December about who we thought might be interesting to find out about, and we asked about Sonia. We asked about various people. But again, those are kind of the judgments you make when you're trying to put together a poll.
The other thing is, of course, that even though Rahul Gandhi is not the declared candidate, I would imagine that he is the obvious candidate. And I don't think there are 2 opinions on that. Mr. Sajjanar and then Professor Lamba. I think Mr. Sajjanar is before.
Yes, thank you very much. I also had maybe more of a comment on the size of the sample, because you mentioned 2,463, if my memory serves me correctly, and then you go on to state that it covers 91% of the population of India. I think 2,400 people speaking for about 90, I think that's a bit exaggerated statement, or I could even call it a little presumptuous that, you think that irrespective of which strata of society, right. I can see that, you have from rural, urban, poor, not so well to do. So my one doubt, strong doubt, is on the size of the sample and the nature of the sample. Yeah. The other, I also take your point, what you mentioned, is that we take the responses as they come from, from the questioners. But you have mentioned 56% are in favor of US. Japan and Russia come below that. Now that I find it a little difficult again to sort of, explain. I don't know whether you have done any sort of analysis, or, is it again depending upon the sample that has brought this? Because, our relationship with the United States has started improving last, 20 odd years, or 10 odd years. And with Russia and etc., it has been a very long-standing, and even with Japan. So how would you sort of, explain this? The last one is you mentioned 78% and for Narendra Modi and 50% for Rahul Gandhi. So how does it work? Meaning, in terms of, I would have imagined if, are they given more than one options, more than one choice? Thank you.
Oh, no, as I said, we gave people, it wasn't a question of choice. It was, we read people a series of names, including Sonia Gandhi and other people, and do you have a favorable, unfavorable opinion of these? So you could have a favorable opinion of Modi and a favorable opinion of Rahul Gandhi. That's not, that would not be the issue.
They have more than
As
one.
you could have a favorable opinion of China and a favorable opinion of the United States. You didn't have to choose between the two. We did ask on the US-China question, who would you like to see India improve its relationship with? So then you're actually forcing people to make a choice. On the question of the sample size, we believe, based on what we've done in 82 countries around the world, that the design of this sample will stand the test of time. Obviously, the question you raised and other people have raised, don't believe that. You know, all I can say is we are confident in our sample design. We spent a lot of time on this and a lot of money on this. We think we're right. That said and done, I hear the concern. It would appear, however, that bigger samples in India, with not much difference in the margin of error, frankly, are coming up with some of the same results. So we actually think these are fairly accurate. But look, time will tell, right? There'll be an election. We'll see what happens. But I do think that it is an issue that people have a legitimate concern. They want this to reflect Indian, you know, the Indian population. We are constantly improving the methodology in India. We used to cover only about 70% of the population. It's now 91%. And the way you do that is basically by coverage of 91%. We're talking about you cover areas that contain 91% of the population. So there are some areas you don't reach. That's without a doubt. But 91% coverage, frankly, is very good for most surveys. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Since the timing you mentioned of the research was December 7 to January 12.
Yes.
And you show a very favorable attitude of Indians towards US.
Yes.
Do you think the Devyani issue has brought it down since then? Because that happened afterwards. And
No. Actually, it happened at the very beginning of it.
Stick to one question.
So we were basically in the field when it was happening.
We'll come back later.
Yeah. So I don't, you know, I think that if it was going to show up, it's more likely to have shown up while we were in the field. I mean, this is, again, one of the dangers of all survey research is that what if something happens while you're in the field, right? And then how do you figure out how it affected things? You know, gentleman here raised the issue of he thinks that support for Russia would be higher. You know, I would argue we were in the field before Russia invaded the Ukraine. It might be lower now. You can't tell, and we'll never know, basically.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I was wondering what you attribute these surprising results about the economy to. To what do you attribute those pretty surprising results about the economy? I know, Pew, you know, you wouldn't necessarily question the results that you get, but maybe if you could analyze a bit, in your opinion, to what do you attribute that? It's just so surprising.
To be frank, we don't know. You may just attribute it to hope over experience, basically, because the recent experience is not that good. And people, you know, again, when you then ask people about specific economic questions, they thought everything was horrible, basically. In fact, frankly, they thought things were so horrible they're hard to analyze, because when 83% of the population says that, I don't know, inflation or unemployment is a big problem, you know, as an analyst, you want to kind of, you know, do men think this more than women, or young people more than old people? When 82 or 83% of the population thinks something, everybody thinks it, you know, overwhelmingly. So, but their experience when you ask them about specific issues seems to be very, very negative. Then you ask them a more general kind of macro question, 30,000-foot level question, and they say it's okay. And if, you know, we actually asked people about their personal finances, they thought those were okay too. Again, which would seem to be contradicted by the specific questions that you asked them. One thing I can tell you after years of doing survey research, what you find is that human beings are infinitely capable of holding mutually contradictory emotions at the same time. And, you know, we all laugh about that, and look, you wouldn't be here if you weren't terribly rational people, you know, who think about these numbers and are interested about these numbers, and it drives you nuts, because you say, well, how can they think this and then think that? But we do know on so many issues, the public is of two minds about things. And I think one of the challenges of leadership, basically, is to deal with that, right? To kind of, how do I sort my way through this public opinion minefield when somebody stands up in the United States, to give you an example, says, Americans don't like trade, and I can prove it because they think it destroys jobs and lowers wages. That's what we find. Now, somebody else can stand up and say, well, Americans love trade, and our survey results can show that. You ask people who think trade's good for the country, they say yes. So you have these contradictory things, and I think that we just have to understand that all human beings hold these contradictory emotions. Inexplicably, I must say.
Right. Yes.
Thank you very much. I definitely congratulate you for the excellent, excellent survey, and based on the, you know, gender, age group, and obviously other parameters. I wish it comes true, but unfortunately in India, elections are not fought on these issues, but on caste and religion. So that's been taken into account. Though I'm very, very sad, but that's unfortunate. That's the truth.
I mean, our survey did not attempt to break down attitudes by caste or religion for two reasons. I mean, one is there are a couple of very large Muslim states that, Kashmir being one of them, where we didn't survey, and so we're not sure that the results, we have results for Muslims that we interviewed, but we don't know if it represents the range of Muslim opinion. I have seen a survey that was done by the Carnegie Endowment in Washington that was released last week. I highly recommend you go look at it on their website. It's only 3 or 4 questions, but they were able to ask, have enough of a sample size to actually say something about the Muslim vote. It wasn't that big for BJP, but then people wouldn't expect it to be that big for BJP. And they also break it down by caste, more so than we were able to do that. My own reading of the coverage is that some people are questioning whether caste and religion will play as big a role this year as it has in India in the past. We can't speak to that. I mean, we can speak, it would appear that the poor vote and the rural vote are more up for grabs than they had been in the past, which would be a big turning point in Indian politics, it seem to me as an outside observer.
I'm highly emboldened to make a very brief comment and elicit your response to my comment. In my view, no single political party will emerge supremely triumphant at the hustings in order to form a government on its own steam. What will finally emerge, according to me, is an unholy, unworkable, unstable, last-minute, horse-traded or mare-traded coalition of partners, or should I say bedfellows, as Churchill, the half-American, said that in politics, when you wake up in the morning, you're not sure whose head you'll have on the pillow next to you. So what is going to emerge is what in India we call as a khichdi, or a mishmash government, which will not subserve the interests of our people.
Well, certainly the
question.
2/3 of the public.
I want a response.
Two-thirds of the public says.
To my comment.
Right.
2/3 of the public say they are frustrated.
And one last, just one sentence.
No, so I think if you get that, then 2/3 of the public are not going to get what they say they want, because they want this gridlock to end. Now, an American talking to you about gridlock is not exactly something an American should be doing, because I can't really speak with any pride about the gridlock in Washington.
After that, could you bring that? Yeah. Yes, go ahead. Could you bring that?
My question is primarily,
I
think,
yeah.
the survey focus are confined to the national parties. Whereas there are so many regional parties in each of the states.
Yes.
And they will be very driving force. And these questions is like the second question,
Sure.
following question of that question. So where your survey figures out those elements which comes from the regional parties or state parties kind of.
Right. Well, we did give people an option. We said, you know, do you want the BJP to run the next government? Do you want Congress to run the next government? Or other? And that was our way to try to get at some of that regional support. Now, the reality is, if we had surveyed 65,000 people, not 2,500 people, you could, in fact, begin to ask about regional parties that are only specific to one state, because you'd have enough people you're surveying in that state to actually get a meaningful response. So some of the bigger Indian surveys can do that. That was not our goal, because then they use that to project how many seats in the Lok Sabha people are going to get. It would appear that from our survey results that people do not want a third party to run this government. They want one of those two major parties to run the government. They may end up with that. Clearly, that comment suggested that. Frankly, we can't address that in our survey. We just know that when people were asked, not who they're going to vote for, because you're right, it's entirely possible someone could say, I would like the BJP to run the next government. I'm tired of these Congress governments, but I'm still going to vote for my regional guy because, you know, he got my son a job, or, you know, my family's always voted for that party, or whatever. What they're implicitly saying is we want those people then to have a coalition with the BJP. Whether they get it or not, that's a totally different issue.
No, we'll take that later. Yeah, correct.
Is there a sort of recognition bias? I mean, I'm thinking, you know, obviously the US comes up favorable, Modi, Rahul Gandhi both come up pretty favorable. When presumably a large number of the respondents are either illiterate or poorly educated, and perhaps don't know a lot about Japan or Russia, or you know, I mean, I'm just sort of wondering whether there isn't a media bias.
I don't have the data at my fingertips, but on that particular question, we did ask people. You know, the option was don't know, or I have no opinion, and so you do get a variance there. Where, and again, I'd have to go back and look at the data. My guess is there was lower don't knows about the United States and China than there were about some other countries or institutions like the European Union. There was very high don't knows about the European Union. You're right. So, I mean, there is that you need to, in these surveys, to give people the options, or at least allow them to volunteer the option that I don't know. Because there is a danger, just to further your, I think it's a legitimate danger.
No, you keep.
Again, as terribly rational people, I'm a former journalist. I mean, you know, you want specific answers to specific questions, and you have to realize that if your questions get too specific, people will have never thought about it before you ask them, and that they'll be embarrassed not to give you an answer. So they'll give you an answer, but frankly, they've never thought about it. So I know there are questions I would love to ask people all over the world about specific issues. And I know you get answers that didn't mean anything. So you do think these things through and say, is this getting at an emotion, which people are likely to have? Because the deeper you cut, the more you expect like a reasoned answer. Yes, I would like Bill 2752 passed. People have never heard of this. They have no idea what you're talking about. So you try to tap into emotions whenever possible. You don't always do it. Sometimes you ask about specific things.
Thank you. Yes.
One thing that surprised me in those results was your result on climate change.
Yes.
That makes me doubt whether there's a bias in your sample. I wouldn't have thought most of our rural population knows enough about climate change any more than most of your Midwestern population worries about climate change. So I'm astonished that, was it 40 or 50%?
50, I think it was 53%.
53% worry about climate change?
Said it was a problem, yeah.
I don't believe that most of our rural population, half of them, that's about 500-600 million people, worry much about climate change. So I'm wondering whether your sample is not only the size of it, but the bias of it. Is it really a rather urban sample or a semi-urban sample?
No, it's
I mean,
actually, it is,
have you
it
covered
is,
the rural
it is
area?
reflective of the size of the Indian population. So the percentage of the Indian population is rural, that's the percentage of the, there's a slight oversampling in urban areas, but not extensively. You're right, I was surprised at the high number as well. It may well be that people attribute to climate change things that aren't necessarily attributable. I mean, you've been in Indian villages, I'm sure. I've been in Indian villages. People complain about the falling water table, right? Now, some people argue that's because they're over-pumping the water and has nothing to do with whether there's enough rain or not. Could we be picking up people kind of seeing it as a rainfall problem, which they've heard there's this thing called climate change and they're blaming that, rather than the over-pumping problem? I don't know. We are going to do, by the way, a more extensive survey on, we plan to at least, next year in 2015, on attitudes towards climate and the environment in at least 45 countries, including India. And one of the things we'll hopefully try to get at is, you know, people's sense of, do they think they're experiencing climate change? And then how do they think they're experiencing climate change? To get at some of those issues, do they make the connections, or is this just something they've heard about? You know, given the low level of concern about this in the United States and China, I am empathetic to your point that there must be a lot of people who have never thought about this and don't know about it. But again, like I say, you ask these people the questions, these are the answers. We would be remiss in not reporting what we found. But we are going to try to follow up and try to get at some of those deeper issues that you're raising.
Bruce,
Yes.
you know, it's always interesting to know the nature and the quantum of change.
Yes.
And Pew has done studies in the past about opinions about the U.S., you know, Russia, and others. So how if you can recall or comment, how does the current findings reflect change over what you did some time back?
Yeah.
Because that's actually what would be very interesting to hear.
It's very interesting.
So
the coverage in India has increased over the years. So I'm reluctant to draw direct parallels because we think we cover more of India now, and that's, you know, this is a better sample than the size of the sample before. That said and done, I went back and looked, and they seem to be roughly comparable. No major shifts that don't reflect broader shifts in the geopolitics. In other words, we do know in the past in India that near the end of George Bush's presidency, there was this increase in approval of the United States, in part because India and the United States were working together in the civil nuclear deal and other things. Right. There was this excitement about the United States after Obama was elected. It's kind of tailed off a bit since then, but that's not unique to India. And we basically saw this Obama boomlet in Western Europe, in Japan, even in China, not in the Middle East, by the way. There was never an Obama bounce in the Middle East. Things went down under Bush and stayed down. You know, then you see a tailing off towards Obama in most countries, including very strongly in China, by the way, but also in Europe because people are disappointed.
Ma'am.
A lot of hard work has gone into this survey, but I'm somehow not convinced with the figures quoted. Yeah. And I want to know, how do you define rural? Because I cannot understand rural people having so much of opinion on international policies or world issues.
Well, I mean, it depends. On some of those questions, they don't. And if you look at those numbers, if you look at those numbers, in some cases, the pro and the con, we'll say, adds up to 50 or 60%. The rest they answered they didn't know. So you do get, but it really depends on the issue. Sometimes rural people have strong opinions. I mean, they seem to be cognizant of the U.S. and China, but not some of these other places. And basically, your first question about how do you define rural and urban, that is a constant problem all over the world because every country defines it differently. So we use the definition that's used by the government and by the statistical agencies in each country because what else do you have to work with? But you're right. I mean, in some countries, I'm not saying this is in India, urban can be areas that are really pretty rural already. Or they can be out of date. In other words, something that was defined rural once, a big city has grown up in the meantime. But you're kind of trapped by what the statistical agencies in those countries define as rural and urban, which also makes it harder. I would love to see us do someday an oversampling of cities all over the world. Just do an urban, how do people in urban areas compare in their opinions? And one of the things that holds us back is that an urban area in Brazil is different than an urban area in Nigeria. And how do you compare the two? But hopefully we'll be able to overcome that because it'll be a wonderful survey.
Right. Just to add a little bit here is from our perspective in the Times of India, we find the circulation picking up no longer in what we consider cities, but in what we would consider villages. And it is very telling. We don't obviously do surveys, but it's much more bottom line oriented about where people are buying an English newspaper for 2 rupees 50 paisa. Yeah, it's actually quite interesting when you come down to it. But
and it is interesting. One of the analyses that I've heard from Indian analysts is that they perceive, and again, I can't speak to this, but they perceive that the values and attitudes of urban areas are now influencing people in rural areas in ways that they never did before.
Right.
And I think that would be a fascinating study to do about, and then we're talking about values issues about, I don't know, divorce or adultery or abortion or all the kind of values things that might be more urban in their nature and kind of anathema to people in rural areas. And are you seeing changes on those issues?
So.
I saw that on the figures you had for the elections, you had separated them by age and by income.
Yes.
My question is whether you have any statistics on actual turnout. I mean, people might have an opinion, but do they actually plan to vote? Or have you noticed certain ages giving? Because you seem to conclude that people have a favorable view of BJP because they have a negative view of Congress. So does that mean you are extrapolating reasons for why people are voting or how many people plan to vote?
No, we did not. Explicitly, we did not ask people if they intended to vote because we didn't intend this to be the kind of election-oriented survey that Indian pollsters do all the time. I think it's a legitimate question to ask. I can tell you, frankly, we debated whether to include it, but it's a terribly significant because if people have an opinion but they aren't going to vote, well then their opinion is not going to influence the outcome of the election. But again, we were not trying to predict the election. We were trying to just assess what the mood of the voters were as they went to vote.
So,
one of the issues I thought you did not cover is about Indians' attitude towards economic reforms and what now a lot of people, one of the issues in these elections is crony capitalism, like how the natural resources are being cornered by some of the few business houses. So do you have any data or are you planning to collect that data?
Right. We did ask people about inequality. They think that inequality is a very important problem. They think it is getting worse, and they think that the economic system is unfair. They also think that business people are as corrupt as public officials, which is interesting, by the way. In China, we asked this question, and basically people said, oh, yeah, those business guys, they're corrupt, and the public officials aren't. And it was like, excuse me? I mean, it's an equation, right? On one side is a business guy, and the other side is a public official. How can one be corrupt and the other isn't? Yes. And Indians didn't draw a distinction. Yeah. But you're right, it would have been very interesting to ask more questions about how people felt about
no, not yet.
Modern capitalism. You wouldn't want to ask about crony capitalism because that would be putting your finger on the scale. Yeah. That would be a negative term, and people would say, "Oh yeah, crony capitalism, it's horrible." But try to get a sense of whether But we do know that people think that the economic system is not fair.
Thank you. I'm John from Mozambique. I find interesting the findings about the preference of Indians about US, because I've been in India for 4 years, and my personal sentiment, I've been traveling across the country, is that many Indians, even in Delhi, even in university when I was studying, they are more familiar with US or UK. I've been spending time explaining them where is Africa. Yeah,
That's true.
in the city.
That's true.
So we cannot see that as a problem. I don't know how. In other countries, no. If you go to Africa, if you go to China, the people know the world, whole world. But Indian, it has been difficult to explain people where is the first place is US, then UK. At least that is my perception.
Yeah.
according
That's
to
true.
what I-
Thank you. If we take the last couple of questions, Iftikhar and Mr. Balakrishnan. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a journalist.
Sure.
So, I was the kind of questions which you have framed and the kind of answers which you have got. It looks like this. It is a presidential system of governance. Here, actually, the candidates also matter.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
The kind of questions which you have framed and the kind of answers which you have got, it looks like that you have prepared these questions or the survey in a presidential system of governance where 2 candidates are in the fray and they are vying for to become a president. Here it is a parliamentary system of governance, and this parliamentary system of governance, candidate matters. And one of the very political parties, they have also saying that the candidate on the ground, his work, whatever is done for last 5 years, matters a lot, and that also determines. Number 2, India is very divided between the East Coast and the West Coast, and the BJP is confined to the West Coast. There is no presence in East Coast. So number 3 is the Muslim electorate. It is not the Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir has just 6 seats, and that does not matter in the center. In rest of the India, 119 seats or 119 Lok Sabha seats, but the Muslim electorate is 15% or more than 15%, and they matter in a multi-cornered contest. Right. And they are, and right now, which we see and have been touring this the countage of voters.
Thank you.
Look, as I said, our intention was not to predict who would get how many seats in the Lok Sabha. To do that, you would need to do what other Indian pollsters have done and have far more interviews at the state level. We frankly didn't have the money to do that, and we were interested in other things. I don't think we misunderstood the nature of the Indian system. We know it's a parliamentary system. But we were trying to judge what people preferred to be the outcome, and our judgment was, maybe we're wrong, that it was going to be a question of whether the BJP led the next government, or the Congress led the next government, or somebody else led the next government. We gave people those options. They told us what they preferred. What can I say? Yeah.
No. Hold on. We can't have.
Yeah, I found your survey on attitudes Pakistan very interesting. Just wanted to ask, have you done similar surveys in Pakistan?
Yes, we
and
have.
probed their views on terrorism, Kashmir, and doing normal business with India and things like that? And how does that compare?
We do an annual survey on Pakistan. It's on our website. We ask some of these same questions. Frankly, I don't fully remember that report, but my recollection is that Pakistanis are worried about terrorism. They understand that it's a challenge in their society. I don't recall whether they are more or less disposed towards improving relations with India than the Indians are with Pakistan. But again, that's available on the website. I recommend to you that the Pakistan survey, because it's a very in-depth survey and goes back many years. So there's a lot of very rich data there about attitudes towards the US. They really don't like us. Attitudes towards drone attacks. Surprise, surprise, they don't like them. We will be coming out with a new survey on Pakistan and actually on India too in the fall. And one of the questions we're going to be zeroing in on there is Afghanistan. And how do the Pakistanis and the Indians feel about the fact that the U.S. is drawing down in Afghanistan, and who's worried about that or who isn't worried about that?
Right. Thank you very much. That only remains for me to say thank you to Bruce for an absolutely scintillating 1 hour. Actually, it always helps for Indians to look at how Indians think about a whole lot of things. And thank you all for being with us this morning. I think there is tea and coffee for everybody. Do join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was very nice.
Great.